Basically, the ways that you can use one mash bill, the grain recipe that goes into every single bourbon, rye, whiskey, and create a lot of different products from that single mash bill.
Right now, though, we're going to turn it over to Frank Dobbins, Burb Your Enthusiasm.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate everybody joining me today. I hope you're having a good time at Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So I'm going to be talking about from one mash bill, many bourbons are born. Basically, the ways that you can use one mash bill, the grain recipe that goes into every single bourbon, rye, whiskey, and create a lot of different products from that single mash bill. So there are a few key elements when you're talking about how one mash bill can produce several different, wildly different sometimes results. There's age, time, the barreling, the location in the warehouse, the blending. So first we're going to talk about age. It seems self-explanatory, but it's a primary difference between something like Knob Creek small batch, 9 years old at 100 proof, or Knob Creek 15 years old, which is the same proof, but tastes very, very different. There's also price tied to the age. So for example, if you have 15 years in a barrel, you're going to be paying tax for all 15 years that barrel spends in a warehouse. That's going to create a product that's going to be a little bit higher priced than the Knob Creek small batch. A lot of people don't understand the differences in price between several different things, and that's one of the things that goes into the pricing difference. Now, there's also barreling. A lot of NDPs in particular use finishing casks to alter the whiskey, so sometimes multiple brands get essentially the same sourced whiskey, and they'll differentiate themselves by rebarreling that whiskey. Now, a good example for that is Angel's Envy. They use a mash bill that's known as 95.5. That's going to be 95% rye, 5% malted barley. It's going to end up being a rye whiskey, but they finish it for 18 months in a Caribbean rum cask. So it's going to be a little bit sweeter than what you might get from a lot of other brands that are using that same exact mash bill. Now, when it comes to location, we're talking about location in a given warehouse. Now, you can also get drastically different flavor profiles from that because of the temperature swings that you're going to get in the different warehouses, the location in the warehouse where the barrel is stored. So for instance, if you have something that's going to be in the middle of the warehouse, it's going to get less airflow. It's going to have a slightly different flavor than things that are on the outside of the warehouse where maybe the windows are open, it's getting some wind blowing directly on the barrel. The taste will inevitably be different. So location is going to play a big factor in how things are going to be different. Another good example, if you're talking about location, is going to be Buffalo Trace. We all know Buffalo Trace. They have a lot of great products. But if you're talking about something like Mashbill 2, which produces Blanton's, those barrels spend time in Warehouse H. There's also the same thing with Elmer T. Lee and Rock Hill Farms and Hancock's. They all use the same mash bill as Blanton's, but because of the location that they're stored, they're all going to taste slightly different. They also have a slightly different proof, which is part of the reason why you can use one mash bill to create several different product lines. Now, when you're talking about proof, that's part of the equation where Blanton's, for instance, uses water dilution to transform something like Blanton's straight from the barrel into Blanton's Gold or Blanton's Standard. Not a lot of people know that, but if you're drinking different Blanton's, because of the proof point, you're going to have a different price point. Because of the time it spends aging, it's going to have a different price point. All of those things contribute to a slightly different bourbon. Now, let's revisit that MGP mash bill we talked about a little bit earlier, the 95.5 mash bill. It's pretty famous. A lot of brands use it, including a brand that we're drinking here today for their rye. Again, 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Now, it's been adopted by plenty of other brands, but there are 50 plus bourbon brands that use, or excuse me, whiskey brands that use the 95.5 mash bill. Some of those include Pinhook, Bullet, Redemption, even premium brands like Old Carter or Foregate. All use the same mash bill to create a lot of different products. Now, it's worth underlining the point that there are other brands who independently use 95.5. A lot of them are getting them from Indiana, which is MGP, and they're producing a 95.5 mash bill, but some brands have decided to create their own 95.5 mash bill, and they're going to be aging it in a different warehouse, in a different state sometimes. They're going to be using different grains to produce that 95.5 mash bill. All of those things contribute to a completely different flavor profile than you might get from Pinhook and the others that we just mentioned. Now, for more specific examples, let's take a look at Jim Beam, Baker's, Knob Creek, Old Crow, Old Taylor. Something they have in common, they all use the same mash bill. So they're using a 75, 13, 12 mash bill, which is going to be 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. They use a barrel char of level 4, and the barreling proof is 125. What's funny is that Wild Turkey actually uses the same exact mash bill. Now you might be thinking to yourself, when I drink Knob Creek at home, it doesn't taste like Wild Turkey 101. That's because you're aging it in a different place and they're using different grains to produce that whiskey. Now, because Wild Turkey has that same mash bill, they're doing different things to differentiate themselves as well. Where you have Rare Breed, which is going to be a higher proof, Russell's Single Barrel, which is going to be a product of a single barrel, and then they're small batching to create the sort of flavor profile that they want. They're fine-tuning those mash bills, the liquid with that mash bill to create a unique flavor profile that fits the Wild Turkey house style. Now, again, we talked about how extra time contributes to different flavor. When it comes to Wild Turkey, the single barrel costs 3 times the amount of a regular bottle of Wild Turkey because the Russell's Reserve single barrel is aging for far longer than your standard Wild Turkey 101 proof. Let's take a look at Brown-Forman. They use a medium rye bourbon mash bill, 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley, with a number 4 char and a barrel entry proof of 125. Now those stats, what they use for their bourbon, can create Woodford Reserve, which is a classic, a common bourbon that everyone loves and enjoys, but it also goes into Old Forester, which is made by the parent company, but it's not made specifically by Old Forester or Woodford Reserve. 2 wildly different bourbons that use the same exact mash bill. We could take a look at Heaven Hill's Wheated mash bill. That makes Old Fitzgerald and Larceny. Larceny sits on shelves for about $30. The Old Fitzgerald is their premium high-end lineup, which can cost you up to $150. The main difference is going to be the age because, again, they're using the same exact mash bill. Now, at the end of the day, price doesn't equal quality. Personally, I love things that are a little bit lower on the shelf because you can always find it. You can always replace your bourbon shelf with them. And at the same time, proof doesn't equal quality. Age doesn't equal quality. You might have a younger bourbon, like me personally, I like Knob Creek's 9-year-old more than their 15-year-old product. Same proof, same mash bill. Ostensibly, it's the same whiskey. It's just different ages. But the same mash bill is going to create wildly different flavors. Now, all of these factors work together to determine what you like. You might like higher proof, you might like higher age, or you might go in the opposite direction. Everybody is different. But this is just a key to understanding your own personal palate and to understand that you can have a lot of different flavors that come out of the same mash bill. It's just a matter of exploring them and figuring out what's for you. Now, understanding those differences can help you make informed buying decisions, save a little bit of money, basically. If you don't want to go buy Old Fitzgerald and spend all that money for that, you can get Larceny with the same mash bill. It's going to taste different, but you're getting the same mash bill if that's what you're into. And also, you have to understand that mash bill really isn't the be-all, end-all either. Just because you like a wheated mash bill doesn't mean that you won't appreciate a rye mash bill. Just because you like a wheated mash bill for a certain brand doesn't mean that a different brand with the same mash bill is going to taste exactly the same. So that's how understanding mash bill can help you kind of deconstruct what the bourbon world, the whiskey world, the rye world is all about. It can help you understand, make better buying decisions, and also understand the differences in flavor that you're going to experience with those different bottles. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but that's pretty much the gist of how one mash bill can create several different bourbons. Thank you. Water can have a huge impact on the mash bill. Now, water, depending on how you're proofing it down from, so we mentioned some of the bourbons that go in at 125 proof, which is the highest legally allowed amount. Some go a little bit lower at 107, for instance. So when you're going into the barrel at a lower proof, that's going to draw different solubles out of the barrels themselves, which is going to extract different flavors. When you're talking about proofing it down after the fact, it's going to wildly change it. For instance, if you pour something in your glass that's 125 proof and add a little bit of water, you're going to get a slightly different flavor as you add water. Another good example is if you sit out on a hot day like today, which is hot as hell, you add an ice cube to your whiskey, it's going to taste different over time as that water melts and it starts transforming everything that's happening in your glass. So water will have a big effect, and it's about you really experimenting and figuring out what you like. So the question was about putting water into the barrel before you take it out and adding water after the fact to proof it down. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, it absolutely affects the end result because the water in the barrel is going to affect the extraction that you're getting from the wood. So because of that, a lot of brands, or I should say a few brands, are experimenting with adding water dilution before it goes into the barrel to try to see what impact that has on flavor and how it changes the whiskey overall. What's most common is for brands to add water after the fact, just because it's easier to play with. If you have something at 125 and you add X amount of water, you know what you need to add to get it to 107. So it's just a little bit easier, and it also is going to affect the flavor a little bit. But a lot of brands are playing with both sides of the fence. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Frank Dobbins, Bourbon Enthusiasm.